is you are here on this map, okay? And this is important because the Erie Canal went down through here, right through the middle of what is now Syracuse. But what is now Syracuse was a swamp before the canal went through, and it was drained by that.
Kind of like New York City.
Okay. Yeah. And so here's the canal, the path of the canal where my finger's tracing. And here is another canal that went up to Oswego. And it's directly across the street. So this was the crossroads of North America.
Right at the frontier, right at the hub for everything.
During the canal era, this was the north-south, east-west intersection. The busiest intersection in North America, this very corner, where this building is placed, and that's why the building is here. So, there's the background. Now, let's go into that building. You still filming?
Yep.
You might have to follow me.
As you can see, there are a lot of old artifacts in here, and you can pick something up off of some of this too. This is really a new addition on the structure until you go through these doors, and then you enter the 1850 Syracuse Waylock building. There's a question about this wall.
She mentioned something about these are the old hands that used to run the locks.
Well, these actually, this is a barn wall from a line barn. It was a barn that was along the edge of the canal, and they had animals towing the boats. And those animals would get tired every so often, so they'd take the team in and let them rest, and they'd give them a new team at the barn. And these carvings were carved in there in the 19th century by the drivers of those horse or mule teams. I think in this case they probably were mules. Okay? So that's very old graffiti.
Great.
And here's where we entered the building. There's a big artifact over here. This is a weighing scale. This is not the scale that was in this building to weigh the boats, but it's very similar to the one. It's the same manufacturer. I think some of the markings on it are a little bit different, but this was located in a building a couple of blocks from here, but it was the same manufacturer. And this is the kind of device that was used to weigh the boats when they came in here. Now, why did they weigh a boat? They weighed the boat empty at the beginning of the season, navigation season, and then they would weigh them when they went through, when they were full of cargo, and they would assess a fee for the cargo. So they weigh the boat full of stuff and subtract the weight of the boat, and thereby arrive at the weight of the cargo, and then they would assess a fee for that. This would not have been in this room, it would have been in the next room. A few other things in here, some paintings.
Now, she mentioned that originally there was a displacement scale, and then it was replaced with one of the ones where they actually dried it and lifted it.
That's correct. There were 3 waylocks. This was the last one. The first 2 used a hydrostatic displacement method where the boat simply went in and they could get a reading of its displacement. It was a fairly accurate way of weighing boats, but the
Captains didn't trust it.
nobody trusted it. Nobody trusted it. It seemed to them that it was some state bureaucrat trying to rip them off, or somebody using magical thinking to arrive at a fee to assess. So there was a lot of argumentation, and finally the state sent out a efficiency expert who noticed right away that when they weighed the material going onto the boats, it was weighed by a scale. So could they make a giant scale that would be able to weigh a boat? And they set about building those, and they built 5 of them on the Erie Canal. And and this was the middle one and the busiest one by far.
And they'd only charge at one of them after they were weighed, right? They stamped at one for the passage?
They'd get a pass, and they could, if they didn't take on more material, they would be able to pass the other ones. Unless somebody thought they should be weighed again. So this is just a small room. This is the room that the weighing would have taken place in. We think that the scale would have been over here somewhere. Probably near that window. Maybe a little bit further out. It may have been somewhere near this column. I'm not sure where it was, but this is where the actual scale was. They went through a series of reductions. If you look at this schematic over here, the boat would go in. What is really this next room over here was the canal with a roof over it. The boat would go in there. They'd close a gate at either end and drain it out just like a bathtub. The boat would settle into a cradle. The cradle would go through a series of reductions and down a single bar into this room to a scale like that one. They'd weigh it, and it took 15 minutes to bring the boat in, close the gates, drain the water out, weigh the boat, get the payment, fill the water back up, open the gates, and get the boat out. So
15 minutes? That's
they could do
pretty quick.
4 of them in an hour.
Wow.
And they did it 24 hours a day, so it was, they ran around the clock during the peak of navigation season. None of this other stuff would have been in here, but if you come over and look at this is a model of what the building looked like when Erie Boulevard was the Erie Canal. And it would have been a wide section with a small island here. The boats would go in under half of the building, and that's where the weigh chamber was.
Pretty neat.
And
Now, when was the original construction of the Waylock building?
this building was built around 1850. So, and we don't know the architect. Our suspicion is that the engineers designed this half of the building, the weigh chamber of the building, and then they just hired a local contractor who
Let somebody else do it.
was familiar with building a Greek revival structure. That was what they specified, a size, and that it be Greek revival because the state government wanted to represent itself as the great democracy of Greece. So they built Greek temples for their outbuildings, their outlying buildings. And this would have been an important state structure in Syracuse. And in the early 1880s, they paid off all of the bonds for the construction of the canal, and they had a lot of money in the bank to keep maintaining it and so on, so they stopped collecting tolls. And at that point, this building stopped weighing boats and became a dry dock, so they could, in an emergency, they could still close the gates and drain it and repair a boat going through. The rest of the building was converted to offices, and they took the plain plaster walls, and in some places they covered them with really nice stamped tin, just to bring it up to date for the era. Very fashionable. As with anything that involves the lowest bidder getting the contract, sometimes they do something called lowballing the bid, and in this case they didn't have enough money for the tin for the ceiling, so they had to go and cannibalize some of their other jobs and finish it up, and so it doesn't exactly match. They did get away with that.
I hope nobody would look up.
It's what we've been told anyway. My alternate theory is that some of these were patches that were done over the years for various reasons. I think they did change the floor plan of the interior of the building. We had another investigative group in here before, and I did not tell them this, but where the boat is was actually converted to an office and enclosed. And downstairs is where the women worked, in the typist pool and stenographer's pool. And there was a stairway that went up, and upstairs is where the men worked. The men were called men, the women were called girls, no matter how old they were. And the men were the engineers and draftsmen and all of those manly sort of things. And they were upstairs. And we'll go up there in a few minutes, but we'll pass through here. This is an artifact that you may find something to take you to. It's quite an interesting artifact. This is the very model of an Erie Canal lock that was shipped by the state of New York to the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893 to represent the highest development of New York State, of the Empire State. And so this is the very model. How we got it, it's a long story, but and that was probably over the course of history the most important World's Fair. There were a lot of changes that took place, both simultaneous to the World's Fair and as a result of some of the things that occurred at the World's Fair. That World's Fair is noteworthy today also because there's a best-selling murder mystery about it, The
Oh,
Devil in the White City.
I've seen that.
Yeah. So we're happy to have this. We don't own it. The state owns it. But it's been here since the museum opened.
Wow. It's impressive. I mean, has there been any like reconstruction work on it, or is this how it's aged since the?
It's really been beaten up over the years. It came back after the World's Fair, and they would throw it on a flatbed and take it to a school and let kids play with it for 6 months and things like that. That's what I've been told. So by the time it ended up here, it was in pretty bad shape. And of course, we have fairly high visitation, and one would have to assume relatively low literacy because we've had signs all over this, don't touch it, but people still have to put their hands all over it. So,
Now, is that made of actual stone?
no, it's wood. It's painted wood.
Really well sculpted.
But we've even had high government officials come in here and stand right in front of the "please do not touch, thank you" sign. Try to turn these and have their hands all over it.
Please do not touch. Generally means please touch as much as you possibly can in a shorter period of time.
Okay, so, and then there are just some artifacts around. These are some model boats for illustration. They're probably not going to have much attached to them. This room has nothing really to do with the canal.
Everything to do with Syracuse.
It has a lot of Syracuse stuff in it. This is about to go away. We have an Elizabeth Cotton exhibit. Elizabeth just got a statue dedicated to her this week.
Nice.
So on Tuesday, they dedicated a 1.5 times life-size bronze statue of her in a grove that the city named after her. So
Nice.
that's nice. From a paranormal perspective, something that I'm always interested in is
The gargoyle.
gargoyles. And that's the gargoyle. And I don't know anything about the gargoyle.
I was gonna say, it's like, where did it come from?
It's a
We have-
very interesting one.
We don't know. I'm assuming that at some point there was a label on it or something, but I don't know why a gargoyle is in a canal museum. But it is a very attractive piece, and I can vouch for the fact that it weighs about a ton. It's one of the heaviest things we've ever moved.
Oof.
That's really cool.
So, yeah, I like it.
There's a lot of character.
I think it's pretty neat.
Very detailed, too.
But these are just sort of local exhibits. They don't really have a lot of historical depth or any relevance to the canal. It's sort of a non sequitur room. As people are learning about the canal, they come in here and they get kind of thrown off track and they get back on track. What we're going to do is put a theater in this room. And this, prior to this exhibit going in, did have a theater in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we put that theater up there, but we're taking that out again, putting it down here, and then the theater with actual seat backs and things, not just benches. So,
What are you going to be doing with the other theater?
we're going to put the store in the other theater and put some
More
other things where the
exhibits.
store is.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, here you can see the particularly nice stamp tin that we had. As I say, it was a very important building, so these doors were, let's see, that's a stairway, that goes into the exhibit, that one doesn't go to anything. And these two were bathrooms, but they're now janitor's closets. Light bulbs and toilet papers in one of them, and I'm not sure what's in the other. This was an office. See, we have some gardening activity too. This is a casting of a gentleman who was a descendant of someone who had worked in here. So
That is really intense.
yeah,
I
it's-
can't believe they did a full body cast.
we have some other statues, but this is an actual casting of a descendant of the man who worked in here.
That's pretty cool.
And
I have a feeling he's going to startle us at some point tonight. You know,
Yeah,
you
look
walk
in
into
here.
a dark room and you see a person.
Well-
a white figure.
just so you know, there will be a few of these. So there are two more. And here's where we enter the way chamber. So what this would have been the wide section of the canal. The street was the canal. That little block in between is that very thin island that protects this area from that. And then these large gates out here are what would close. A valve over there would be opened, more of a sluice gate, and the water would exit through there, go under the canal, go over and under the Oswego Canal, and halfway across the city and end up in Onondaga Creek, because
Wow.
there were no pumps, so water had
Had
to
to go
follow
down.
gravity, so they had to find a lower body of water than this to drain into. It was a substantial distance away.
Substantial amount of work to do that, too. That was amazing, man, how they did some of the stuff back then.
Yeah.
Like the immense amount of just like, let's do this plus this plus this to get this done.
Now, this all had a floor on it that was pretty level, and this is where the so-called girls worked. The ceiling wasn't here originally. When this was a waylock, that was all open space up there. That was added later so they could put the draftsman in that section.
Now, is the ceiling curved or is that just an optical illusion?
No, it's
from
curved.
the-
It's
Okay.
curved and it's poured cement. It's a pretty solid ceiling, and that's to hold up the floor above that had a lot of men working in it.
Oh, okay, so then that was sort of to strengthen the ceiling then, okay.
And I don't know where that stairway was. It was over here somewhere. Stairway.
Section of discolored brick.
No, it's not where the discolored brick was. It's someplace up here that was a kind of a small, narrow stairway that went up. And that was what the women would go up and they'd take dictation and they'd come down and type it.
Now, she mentioned a couple of, or at least one accident here where some poor woman had fallen in.
That's a rumor. I don't have any actual record of that. I've heard
Okay.
many, many times that happened. Everybody seems to believe it. And I don't know that we've ever had any evidence of any person staying around after an accident like that in this space, but I know this was a very busy space, and this was a dangerous place to work, and it was open for a long time, and it also was kind of densely populated with secretarial workforce too in later years. So who knows?
Now, when this was open, was there any form of railings or anything like that? I'm seeing these pins along. These just hold the slabs together.
These are here for our safety today. I don't think these were here. I think there was nothing here. There was just the water and the stone. These are what are called staples.
To hold the different stones together.
They hold these big stones together. Now, you wouldn't think these would shift, but they just wanted to be sure that they wouldn't shift. And those are commonly found around all of the stone canal structures in New York State.
Yeah, they'd be concerned erosion causes shift.
Well, and there's seasons and so on. And the way those are made, they drill 2 holes and they drive rods down in there, and then they pour molten metal across the top. And I believe they were known as staples, but they didn't have a big stapler that came in and pressed staples into stone.
That'd be a hell of a stapler.
Yeah. Now, the boat itself is a relatively new structure. I have met the people who built it. They're not particularly old, so
Replica of a traditional.
it is a replica of a full-sized line boat. It's called a waterline replica because it only goes down to the water line. We had a storm a couple of years ago, a rainstorm, and all of this pretty much got filled up with water very briefly. I didn't notice the boat rising and that. There's nothing under it. It's completely, there is no bottom on the boat.
Makes sense, if there's all this gravel, there's no point in
Yeah.
making a full boat, just have.
But we have the gravel there for, our visitors to suspend their disbelief and pretend that's water. And it's a pretty good simulation most of the time. Do you have an interest in going on the boat, or
Sure, we can take
Okay,
a walk through the boat.
watch your step? This tiny boat carried a crew, cargo, and passengers. This would be crew quarters, which mainly was where the food was prepared and where the meals were eaten. The women slept on the deck down here. The men in the crew usually slept up on the upper deck. Even when it was raining, they just pull a cloth over them, and they'd coil up line and use that for their beds. You'd think it would be uncomfortable to sleep on the deck, but the season of navigation was summer. It was in upstate New York. It was
It's
around
fairly
water.
mild.
So I'll just say it was fairly hot and humid. So people didn't want to be up very high. The cool place was on the floor. Yeah. It's about the size of a trailer on a tractor trailer. There are exhibits in here, but it really gives you a sense of what the carrying capacity of this boat was. In volume, it's about the same as a tractor trailer. In weight, it's many times what a tractor trailer today could carry.
Yeah.
It's better means of transport if you weren't in a hurry.
Yeah. And that's what became the problem, right? The fact that people wanted to get, shipping became something that had to happen fast and wouldn't
Well,
just.
There were a lot of things. The canal didn't operate year-round, so to ship in the winter they needed something, and so they built railroads and roads. And for things to get there rapidly, of course, you want a railroad or a road. So, but it didn't completely. The canal always changed what it carried. So when I was growing up, they still had a lot of oil tankers on the canal,
Okay.
and those were replaced by pipelines that were built parallel to the canal. So they didn't need to carry oil in a ship. And more recently, what they carry on the canal barges are very heavy devices that don't need to be there tomorrow. Things like turbines and wind turbines and things like that that are just
Too big.
huge and heavy. And as the price of fuel goes up, you'll never see those being trucked long distance.
Yeah.
They'll find a boat to put it on because the boat uses a fraction of the fuel to go the same distance. And those things are really heavy. I've seen big transformers that you tried to put on a truck. The tires would burst. The weight was so great.
Yeah, and some of the blades are like 80 or even 120 feet long.
Yeah. So a lot of that is what you see on boats, and those things weigh, so much. It's ridiculous. So they do. So there is still a lot of shipping on the canal. But it increases when the price of fuel increases, and it goes down when the price of fuel goes down because the price of fuel goes down. It's a lot.
More efficient. Like we
More
can get it
efficient to
faster.
go other ways,
Yeah.
and when the price goes down, then you see pleasure craft on the canal more.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I've seen some almost like parade of boats sort of things. And the canal's still completely functional from one side of the state to the other, isn't it?
Yeah. But if the price of fuel goes up, pleasure craft
Go
stay.
away.
Well, they stay in port.
Mhm.
They have cocktail parties on the deck or something.
Exactly.
They don't have any place to go.
So how does it run the canal? Is it still sort of weight based, or does it do it by the size of the boat, or?
They stopped assessing the fees in 1882. So
It's just I'm
They-
going through the lock.
they
You need
go.
to do.
yeah, they some years they have permits
Mhm.
that they'll buy. But by and large, there isn't any weighing or anything like that. So,
Nice.
that's a pretty.
I was always curious about that. It's like see the pleasure craft and getting on the locks. It's like yeah, it'll take a long while, nice, smooth, slow ride, but it's like are they paying by the side length of their boat or?
Well, and the other thing is the canal doesn't need boats on it to have to be maintained because it also has a primary function of being the flood control system for upstate New York. If you keep in mind about a third of the state that the canal goes through was underwater, and it'll revert to that if they don't if they don't watch this stuff all the time. It's quite an engineering feat that
Seriously.
they still actually are able to maintain all these cities and things in upstate New York. To me, it seems, because it's something. It's really a massive drainage control.
Yeah, like Utica and their wonders of moving the Mohawk River. It still floods.
Yeah, and it does still flood. It's no matter how advanced the engineering is.
It's not
It
a
doesn't
perfect
count
system,
forever.
it's just
Yeah.
better than
Well,
what it was.
last year for the first time since the canal was completely opened in 1825, they had a tornado take out one of the locks. Well, that never happened before.
Mhm.
And they managed to reopen that lock by Thanksgiving, just to let all the boats that had been stuck and weren't able to go through. They opened it up for a couple of weeks and let all the boats pass in the direction they were going, and they closed it down and did the real repairs, the big repairs.
And they probably have a priority system, what can we fix that'll let things go through, and then what can we
Yeah, and they
hold
were.
off to later.
They were under a time pressure to get it open before freezing, so all of these craft that were stuck would not have to go thousands of miles out of their way to get to their destinations. But they only opened briefly, and then they went back and repaired everything properly. So, this is where the passengers rode. There were no amenities in here, no bathrooms, no food, no entertainment, really. They had berths that they hung on the side. Nobody ever slept in the top one, to the best of my knowledge, just because it was so humid you couldn't breathe. Humidity and heat on the canal were always a real issue, especially in this section. It's just there were some days on the canal you couldn't see through the air. It was so saturated with dampness.
Now, what did they do if there were no bathrooms? I mean, did they stop often enough, or
A
did they?
boat like this went pretty slowly. It was about 2 miles an hour, 2.5 miles an hour.
Mhm.
So they could get off any time. There were low bridges. They could just grab a bridge when the boat went under it and climb up on it, get off, go in the woods.
Hop back on,
Yeah,
feet down the road or river.
people were pretty good at finding places to relieve themselves. They could also get off and get food. There were farms all the way along. There were taverns. You could stop in and get a sandwich or some meal, bowl of stew, piece of meat someplace. And the food was pretty fresh. It was probably better food than we eat today. Very, very fresh because they were buying it right on the farm.
I just have this image of a whole bunch of people that just like randomly get off, and then all of a sudden you have this flood of people running back to the boat.
Well, there were stories about that too. Who was it? Somebody, Nathaniel Hawthorne or somebody, got off the boat to look at something, and the boat was stopped. And when he came back to the boat, it was gone. He walked all the way from Utica to Syracuse or something in search of his boat.
Did he ever find it?
Well, he probably eventually caught up with them. They weren't moving that quickly.
Start
I don't know if it was Hawthorne. I can't remember who that was. But there's read about that at some point. So the boat would be in here for 15 minutes, then they'd open those gates, and off they would go. And they'd go out. Good story so far. This was all open structure. None of this. This is all in here just so we can operate it as a museum in this climate. But it would have been completely open when it was operated as a ley line.
I imagine in the winter winter, this just becomes a giant snowball up to about here.
Some years, this year it didn't snow at all. But some years it's pretty snowy. So that's your step. So that's this floor. Go upstairs and take a look at that and see what